Life is unpredictable. That's what makes it so much fun. But it's also what can make it so agonizing. One thing I always say is that you should hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. I definitely came up with that. Or, after one simple Google search will tell you, famed comedian Mel Brooks was the one who coined that phrase. Well, Mel, I couldn't agree with you more. One important way to prepare for the worst is by building an emergency fund. In this lesson, you'll learn what an emergency fund is, what an emergency fund is not, and how and where to set up an emergency fund. We're putting the fun in emergency fund. What an emergency fund is. An emergency fund is a savings buffer that allows you to prepare for unexpected emergencies, like losing your job, medical issues, unexpected travel, or a pandemic. Most of my emergency fund went to hand sanitizer. Worth it. Everyone's emergency fund will vary depending on their situation, but the standard advice is that you should save enough to last you for 3 to 8 months. Think about how much money you would need to live your life as close to normal, including paying bills and living expenses during this period if you suddenly lost your job, for example. Unfortunately, according to a survey by the Fed, about 40% of American adults said they would not be able to cover a $400 emergency with cash, savings, or a credit card charge that they could quickly pay off. Furthermore, 27% of people surveyed said they would need to borrow the money or sell something to come up with that $400. Building your emergency fund will help ensure that the toughest times in your life don't become even tougher than they need to be.
I declare bankruptcy!
That's a pretty powerful thing. What an emergency fund is not. An emergency fund is not the same for everyone. People have different incomes, lifestyles, and needs. Better not have a big emergency. It's important to be honest about your situation when thinking about how much you need to put away.
I lie to myself.
An emergency fund is also not for planned purchases. If you're saving for college, or a new car, or a house, that money should not be part of your emergency fund. Those purchases aren't emergencies. You need an emergency fund for unexpected life events, not planned ones. Lastly, an emergency fund doesn't need to be huge right away. Start small. Don't get intimidated. Put a little bit in a savings account to start off and keep adding until it's more sizable. I like to say Rome wasn't built in a day. I came up with that one too. How to set up an emergency fund. You now know what an emergency fund is and is not. That's important. So naturally, your next question might be, so how and where do I set this bad boy up? Well, the short answer is there's no one way to set up an emergency fund. Everyone is different. What works best for one person might not work best for the other. Here are a few steps to get you started. 1. Set up a savings account that is easy to access. In case of an emergency, you need to be able to get the money quickly. Ideally, that savings account would have a high annual percentage yield, or APY, so that your money can make some money. Average savings accounts have APYs around 0.06%, while the best are up around 0.6%. Also, it would be great if the account was federally insured, so you know it's a safe place to put your money. 2. Calculate your living expenses for the length of time you decide your emergency fund should cover. This will give you a goal to reach, so you aren't just saving with no endpoint. 3. Dedicate a comfortable amount of income to your emergency fund. Decide what amount you can afford to put away every month, and maybe even set up an automatic transfer so you don't have to think about it. Just set it and forget it. Make it easy on yourself. While we hope you never have to use the emergency fund, it's important to have it. Stuff happens. It might not technically be your fault if that amazing fireworks show you planned for your first kid's gender reveal burned down your neighbor's fence, but you will have to pay for it. Sorry again about that, Bob. So when you're opening an emergency account, start small, stay consistent, and you'll have a nice financial buffer before you know it.